The crystal spires of Nexus Prime gleamed under the light of three suns, their surfaces reflecting the countless ships that docked at humanity's greatest diplomatic station. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the observation deck, watching the steady stream of vessels from dozens of different species. For 30 years, this place had been the crown jewel of human diplomacy, a testament to their ability to bring together the most fractured alliance in galactic history. Today, she was here to shut it down. Madam Ambassador, the final transport is ready for departure, came the voice of her aide, Marcus Chun, from behind her. His tone carried the weight of what they were all feeling, the end of an era that had defined human civilization for generations. Elena turned away from the window, her weathered face showing the strain of the past months. At 73, she had spent more of her life in space than on Earth, dedicating herself to the belief that words could solve any problem, that understanding could bridge any gap. The galaxy had taught her otherwise. "Have all the diplomatic archives been secured?" she asked, straightening her formal Navy jacket one last time. "Every document, every treaty, every cultural exchange record. The quantum drives are locked and ready for transport to Earth," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across his tablet as he confirmed the final details. Elena nodded, then activated her communication device. The message would go out simultaneously to every member species of the Galactic Council, to every trade partner, to every ally humanity had cultivated over 3 decades of patient, careful diplomacy. To all beings who received this transmission, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was announcing. "This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Government and all human colonies. As of this moment, humanity is formally withdrawing from all diplomatic relations with non-human species." She paused, knowing that across the galaxy, in council chambers and trading posts and military command centers, beings were stopping what they were doing to listen. The implications of her words would ripple through space faster than any ship could travel. "For 30 years, we have served as mediators, as peacemakers, as the bridge between species that could not speak to each other without human translation. We have prevented 17 wars, negotiated 43 trade agreements, and facilitated the peaceful resolution of over 3,000 disputes. We did this because we believed in the power of communication and the possibility of unity among the stars." The ambassador's voice grew harder, carrying decades of accumulated frustration. That faith has been rewarded with betrayal, exploitation, and contempt. While we spend our resources maintaining peace, others use that peace to strengthen themselves at our expense. While we opened our borders to refugees and traders, others closed theirs to us. While we shared our knowledge freely, others hoarded theirs behind walls of bureaucracy and prejudice. Elena walked to her desk, where a thick folder lay open. Inside were reports that told the story of humanity's gradual marginalization in the very alliance they had created. The Zephyrian Empire has imposed a 90% tariff on human goods while demanding free access to our markets. The hegemony of Kithra has claimed 17 human colonies as disputed territory based on archaeological evidence they refuse to share with neutral arbitrators. The collective has banned human researchers from accessing the galactic database while continuing to demand our contributions to its maintenance. She turned each page as she spoke, her voice remaining calm even as she listed grievance after grievance. The Void Swimmers have declared human space travelers to be biologically contaminated and quarantine any vessel that has carried humans, effectively cutting us off from 1/3 of known trade routes. The Silicon Sovereignty has stolen 37 human technological innovations, patenting them under their own names while claiming humans lack the intellectual sophistication for true invention. The list went on. Each member species of the Galactic Council had, in their own way, taken advantage of humanity's commitment to peaceful resolution. They had treated human patience as weakness, human generosity as stupidity, human diplomacy as a tool to be exploited rather than a bridge to be honored. We have filed 1,247 formal complaints with the Galactic Council over the past 5 years, Elena continued. Of these, exactly 31 have been addressed, and of those 31, only 7 were resolved in humanity's favor. The Council has repeatedly ruled that human concerns are premature, culturally biased, or insufficient to warrant intervention. She closed the folder and looked directly into the camera. We are done asking for justice. We are done begging for fairness. We are done pretending that our commitment to peace will eventually be reciprocated. Effective immediately, all human diplomatic missions are closing. All human mediators are being recalled. All human peacekeeping forces are being withdrawn. The weight of those words settled over the galaxy like a shroud. For 3 decades, human diplomats had been the oil that kept the galactic machinery running smoothly. They had been translators, mediators, and neutral parties in thousands of disputes. Without them, the carefully balanced alliance that governed interstellar civilization would have to find new ways to function. To those species that have honored their agreements with humanity, we offer continued trade and cooperation on a bilateral basis. You may contact Earth directly to negotiate new arrangements. To those that have not, Elena's voice carried a cold finality. You are on your own. She ended the transmission and stood in the sudden silence of the observation deck. Through the crystal walls, she could see the first alien vessels beginning to undock from Nexus Prime, their captains no doubt scrambling to contact their home governments, to understand what this sudden withdrawal meant for their own plans and ambitions. Marcus approached her carefully. Ma'am, we're receiving thousands of incoming transmissions. Every government in the galaxy wants to speak with you. Elena smiled for the first time in months. Then, they should have thought of that before they spent 30 years ignoring us. Have a communications array shut down. We're going home. As the last human transport prepared to leave Nexus Prime, Elena took one final look at the station that had been her home for so long. The crystal spires would remain a monument to humanity's failed dream of galactic cooperation. But the humans who had made that dream possible were leaving, taking with them 3 decades of accumulated knowledge about every species, every culture, every secret weakness, and strength of their former allies. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when the peacemakers decided they had enough of peace. 3 days after the withdrawal announcement, the first crisis erupted. The Ferrosite Mining Consortium, a joint venture between 7 different species, fell apart when the crystalline entities accused the hive minds of skimming profits. Normally, human arbitrators would have been called in within hours to mediate the dispute. Instead, the 2 species recalled their fleets and began massing for war. President Sarah Chun of Earth received the emergency transmission from consortium leader Vextar Crystalwing in her office in New Geneva. The insectoid being's image flickered on the holographic display, its compound eyes showing the strain of the crisis. President Chun, the consortium urgently requests human mediation in our dispute with the hive minds. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation for your services. Sarah looked at the transmission for a long moment before responding. She was Elena Vasquez's niece and had been elected on a platform of human independence from galactic politics. Her response was brief and final. The United Earth government no longer provides mediation services to non-human entities. We suggest you resolve your dispute through the Galactic Council's arbitration system. Vextar's antennae twitched in agitation. Respected President, the Council's arbitration system requires a minimum of 18 months to process a claim. The consortium cannot survive that long without resolution. Surely some accommodation can be reached. None, Sarah replied simply, and closed the channel. Within a week, the Ferrosite Mining Consortium had dissolved completely. The crystal entities and hive minds went to war over the mining rights, drawing in their respective allies and creating the first multi-species conflict in 12 years. The war would last 8 months and devastate 3-star systems before exhaustion forced a ceasefire. But that was only the beginning. The trilateral trade agreement between the aquatic republics, the nomad fleets, and the garden worlds had depended on human translators to navigate the complex web of cultural taboos and linguistic nuances that made direct communication nearly impossible. Without human mediators, negotiations for the agreement's renewal broke down completely when a nomad fleet captain accidentally used what the aquatics considered a grave insult in their greeting. The aquatic republics imposed an immediate embargo on all trade with the nomad fleets. The nomads, dependent on aquatic-controlled water sources, retaliated by raiding Garden World agricultural shipments. The Garden Worlds called in their mutual defense pacts, and within 2 weeks, a three-way war had erupted that would consume the resources of all three civilizations for years to come. The pattern repeated itself across the galaxy. The Peace of Kepler Station, which had ended a century-long war between the Machine Collective and the Biological Purity Movement, began to crumble when both sides accused the other of violations that human observers would previously have investigated and resolved. The Great Library Accords, which govern access to the galaxy's collected knowledge, fell apart when species began withholding information from their traditional enemies without human arbitrators to enforce sharing agreements. Within 6 months of humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, for separate wars had erupted, 12 major trade agreements had collapsed, and the Galactic Council itself was paralyzed by procedural disputes that would have taken human diplomats hours to resolve. Elena Vasquez watched the chaos unfold from her retirement home in the Swiss Alps, where she tended a small garden and wrote her memoirs. The former ambassador felt no satisfaction in being proven right, only a deep sadness for what might have been. Her peaceful retirement was interrupted by a visit from General Patricia Hayes, the head of Earth's intelligence services. "Elena, we need to talk," Patricia said, settling into a chair on the garden terrace. "The intelligence community has been analyzing the fallout from our withdrawal. The numbers are significant." Elena poured tea for both of them, her movements deliberate and calm. "How significant?" "Galactic trade volume has decreased by 37%. Military spending across all major powers has increased by an average of 40%. The Galactic Council has been unable to pass any meaningful legislation in 4 months because no one trusts anyone else anymore without human mediation." Patricia pulled out a secure tablet and showed Elena a series of charts and graphs. "But here's the interesting part," she continued. "While everyone else is tearing each other apart, human colonies have seen unprecedented growth. Without the burden of maintaining galactic peace, we've been able to focus our resources on our own development. Our trade with Earth has increased by 60%. Our population growth has accelerated, and our technological advancement has jumped forward by decades." Elena studied the data with interest. "Are you suggesting that our withdrawal was economically beneficial?" "I'm stating it as fact," Patricia replied. "But there's more. Our intelligence networks, which we built up over 30 years of diplomatic contact, are still largely intact. We know more about the internal politics, military capabilities, and economic vulnerabilities of every major power than they know about each other. Information that we use to share freely in the name of transparency, we now keep to ourselves." The general leaned forward, her expression serious. "Elena, for the first time in human history, we're not just another species trying to find our place in the galaxy. We're a power unto ourselves, with advantages that grow stronger every day while our former allies grow weaker." Elena sipped her tea thoughtfully. "And what does the government intend to do with these advantages?" "That depends," Patricia said, "on whether the galaxy learns to function without us, or whether they come crawling back begging for help." As if on cue, Elena's personal communication device chimed. The incoming message was from Nexus Prime, though the station was now largely abandoned. Only a skeleton crew remained to maintain basic operations. The message was from Chancellor Vorthak of the Galactic Council, the elderly Zephyrian who had led the organization for the past decade. His image appeared in holographic form, his usual pompous demeanor replaced by something approaching desperation. "Ambassador Vasquez," He began, his translator giving his words a stilted quality. I hope this message finds you well. The Council has asked me to reach out to you personally regarding humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs. Elena and Patricia exchanged glances. It had taken the Council 6 months to swallow their pride enough to make this call. The situation in the galaxy has become challenging since your departure. We had not fully appreciated the extent to which human mediation had become integral to galactic stability. The Council would be willing to discuss terms for humanity's return to diplomatic engagement. The Chancellor paused, clearly struggling with words he had never thought he would have to say. We are prepared to offer humanity a permanent seat on the Council Executive, with veto power over all major decisions. We would also be open to discussing revisions to trade agreements and territorial disputes that have been raised by your government. If you could see your way clear to reopening negotiations. Elena turned off the message without listening to the rest. Interesting timing, she said to Patricia. They're finally ready to talk after 6 months of chaos. The question is, Patricia replied, are we ready to listen? Elena looked out over her garden, where the first snow of winter was beginning to fall. She thought about the young diplomat she had once been, full of hope for a united galaxy. That woman would have jumped at the chance to return to the negotiating table, to rebuild the bridges that had been burned. But Elena Vasquez was no longer young, and she had learned the hard way that respect was something that had to be earned, not freely given. Tell the Chancellor, she said finally, that humanity appreciates his message, and that we'll consider a response when the galaxy demonstrates that it can survive without us. Patricia smiled. And if they can't? Elena's expression remained serene as she watched the snow fall. Then, they'll learn what it really costs to lose the humans. The message Elena sent back to Chancellor Vorthak was brief and polite, but its implications were clear to anyone who understood diplomacy. Humanity was no longer the eager junior partner in galactic civilization. They had become something far more dangerous, a power that was willing to wait. The galaxy was about to discover that patience, when wielded by those who had been forced to learn it the hard way, could be the most devastating weapon of all. Admiral Zhang Wei stood on the bridge of the ESS Harmony, humanity's most advanced exploration vessel, as it approached the Kepler Station battlefield. The massive space station, once a symbol of interspecies cooperation, now drifted in ruins among the debris of 100 destroyed ships. This was where the Machine Collective and the Biological Purity Movement had finally settled their ancient grudge by destroying everything they had once fought to protect. Analysis complete, Admiral, reported Commander Sarah Kim from the tactical station. 17 different ship designs in the debris field, representing at least 8 separate species. Energy signatures suggest the battle lasted approximately 6 days. No survivors detected. Zhang nodded grimly as he studied the tactical display. The destruction was absolute. Not just the military vessels, but the station itself had been gutted. The great library that had once housed the collected knowledge of 47 civilizations was nothing but twisted metal and scattered data cores. What triggered the final confrontation? He asked. Based on our intelligence intercepts, Kim replied. It started with a trade dispute. Both sides claimed ownership of a deuterium shipment. Without human arbitrators to verify the documentation, each side accused the other of fraud. Within 72 hours, they had called in their full fleets. Zhang walked to the observation deck and looked out at the debris field. 2 years had passed since humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, and scenes like this had become common across known space. What the aliens called the Great Unraveling was accelerating beyond anyone's predictions. Sir, incoming transmission from Earth Command, announced Communications Officer Torres. The holographic image of Fleet Admiral Jackson materialized beside Zhang. The older man's face showed the strain of managing humanity's new position in galactic affairs. Zhang, I need you to alter course immediately. The aquatic republics have formally requested human assistance with the nomad situation. Zhang raised an eyebrow. Assistance? I thought they were the ones who declared us culturally incompatible last year. They were. Apparently, cultural compatibility becomes less important when your civilization is facing extinction. Jackson's expression was grim. The nomad fleets have blockaded every water world in aquatic space. Without access to their breeding grounds, the aquatic birth rate has dropped by 90% in the past 18 months. The admiral pulled up a star map showing the aquatic territories. Nearly three-quarters of their systems were now under nomad control, and the remaining aquatic fleets were trapped in an ever-shrinking pocket of space. What are they offering in return for our help? Zhang asked. Full access to their hydroponic technology, exclusive trading rights to their biopharmaceuticals, and formal recognition of human territorial claims to the Centauri cluster. Zhang whistled softly. The Centauri cluster contains some of the richest mining systems in known space, but the aquatic republics had claimed it based on ancient territorial agreements that predated human spaceflight. For decades, they had refused to even discuss the matter. And if we refuse, he asked, then the aquatic civilization ceases to exist within 6 months, and the nomad fleets gain control of the largest water reserves in the galaxy. Zhang considered the implications. The nomads were already drunk on their recent victories against the Garden Worlds. Adding aquatic resources to their growing empire would make them a major threat to human expansion in the Outer Rim. What does Earth Command recommend? Jackson's smile was cold. We help them, but on our terms and at our price. The days of human charity are over, Zhang. If they want our mediation, they pay for it. If they want our protection, they earn it. And if they want our forgiveness for 30 years of insults and exploitation, they beg for it. The transmission ended, and Zhang turned to his crew. Set course for Aquatic Prime, and send word to the nomad leadership that humanity is willing to serve as neutral mediators in their dispute with the aquatics. Sir, Commander Kim asked, are we taking sides? Zhang's expression remained neutral. We're doing what we've always done, Commander. We're keeping the peace. The difference is that now we get paid for it. The journey to Aquatic Prime took 5 days, during which Zhang received daily briefings on the deteriorating galactic situation. The reports made for sobering reading. The Ferrocite War had expanded to include 7-star systems and was showing no signs of ending. The crystalline entities had developed new weapons specifically designed to shatter hive mind neural networks, while the hive minds had created biological viruses that could corrupt crystalline matrix structures. Both sides had crossed lines that made eventual reconciliation nearly impossible. The Garden Worlds had formed an alliance with the Silicon Sovereignty, but their combined fleets were still losing ground to the nomad expansion. The Sovereign's technological superiority was meaningless against an enemy that fought with pure numbers and had no fixed installations to defend. Most concerning of all, the Zephyrian Empire was mobilizing its full military might for what their intelligence services called Operation Hegemony, a plan to conquer their neighbors while those neighbors were distracted by other wars. The galaxy is tearing itself apart, Zhang observed to his senior staff during their daily briefing, and everyone expects us to fix it for them. The question is whether we should, replied Dr. Elizabeth Morris, the ship's xenological specialist. Some of these conflicts have been brewing for centuries. Maybe it's better to let them burn themselves out. Chief Engineer Carlos Rodriguez shook his head. That's not who we are, Doctor. We've always been the ones to step in and stop the fighting. Have we? Morris countered. Or have we been enablers, allowing these species to avoid dealing with their fundamental incompatibilities by providing an external mediator? Maybe forcing them to work out their own solutions will lead to more permanent peace. Zhang listened to the debate with interest. This was the central question that Earth's leadership had been wrestling with for 2 years. Were they helping the galaxy by staying away, or were they condemning billions of beings to unnecessary suffering? The answer came when they reached Aquatic Prime. The planet that had once been the jewel of aquatic civilization was dying. The massive oceans that covered 90% of its surface were turning brown with algae blooms caused by industrial pollution. Without access to their pristine breeding worlds, the aquatics had been forced to use their homeworld's oceans for both habitation and production, destroying the delicate ecosystem balance they had maintained for millennia. Chancellor Reeftau of the Aquatic Republics met Zhang's shuttle personally, an unprecedented honor that spoke to the desperation of her people. The Chancellor was ancient even by aquatic standards, her bioluminescent patterns dim with age and stress. Admiral Zhang, she said through her translation device, her words carrying the formal cadence of aquatic diplomatic speech. The Republics are honored by your presence. We have prepared quarters for your delegation that meet human environmental requirements. Zhang nodded politely. Chancellor, Earth appreciates your hospitality. I understand you have a proposal for us to consider. The Chancellor's patterns flickered in what Zhang recognized as embarrassment. Admiral, we must speak plainly. The situation has progressed beyond diplomatic niceties. Our species faces extinction. The nomad blockade has prevented access to our breeding grounds for 23 months. Our birth rate has fallen to levels that cannot sustain our population. She led Zhang through the underwater city that served as the Republic's capital. The architecture was beautiful, flowing organic curves that mimicked the movement of water. But even here, signs of decay were evident. Many of the outer districts were abandoned, their bioluminescent lighting systems dark and dead. We have made mistakes, the Chancellor continued, her translator giving her words a mechanical quality that couldn't hide their emotional weight. In our pride, we believed that the natural order would eventually assert itself, that conflicts would resolve themselves without external interference. We thought humanity's withdrawal would force the galaxy to mature, to find better ways of resolving disputes. They entered a vast chamber where hundreds of aquatic officials floated in specialized tanks, their patterns creating a complex light show as they communicated in their native bioluminescent language. The conversation stopped as Zhang entered, thousands of eyes turning to study the human who might hold the key to their survival. Instead, the Chancellor said, "We have learned that some species are fundamentally incompatible. The nomads see us as a resource to be exploited. Our water worlds exist only to serve their needs. They have no interest in coexistence, only domination." Zhang had read the intelligence briefings. The nomad fleets were exactly what their name suggested, a civilization built around constant movement and expansion. They had no homeworld, no fixed territories, only an endless migration that consumed resources and moved on. For them, the aquatic worlds were simply the next stop on an infinite journey. What specifically are you asking of humanity? Zhang asked. The Chancellor's patterns shifted to what Zhang recognized as supplication, a display that would have been unthinkable from the proud aquatics just a few years earlier. We ask for mediation with the nomad leadership. We are willing to offer them access to our outer systems in exchange for preservation of our core breeding worlds. We believe human diplomats could craft an agreement that serves both people's needs. Zhang considered the request. It was reasonable, and under the old system, human mediators would have been arranging such negotiations within days. But the old system was dead, killed by 30 years of thankless service and accumulated insults. Chancellor, Zhang said carefully, humanity no longer provides free mediation services. If you wish to retain human diplomatic assistance, we would need to discuss terms. The Chancellor's patterns dimmed further. What terms would Earth find acceptable? Zhang activated his tablet and displayed a document that had been prepared by Earth's diplomatic corps months earlier. It was titled Standard Terms for Mediation Services, and it was unlike any agreement the galaxy had seen before. First, humanity requires exclusive territorial rights to the Centauri cluster and all associated mining operations. Second, we require preferential trading status with the republics, including technology transfers that were previously classified. Third, we require permanent basing rights for human fleets in aquatic space. The Chancellor studied the terms, her patterns flickering through several different emotional states. These were not the conditions of a helping hand extended to an ally. They were the demands of a power negotiating from strength. These terms are, she began then, stopped herself. What word could she use? Excessive? Exploitative? The same words that humans had swallowed for 30 years, while being slowly marginalized by their supposed allies? These terms are acceptable, she said finally, if you can save our species. Zhang nodded and prepared to send the agreement to Earth for final approval. But, as he did, he couldn't help but notice the irony. For 3 decades, humanity had offered these same services for free, asking only for respect and fair treatment in return. Now that they were finally receiving both, it came at a price that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The negotiations with the Nomad fleets took place aboard Zhang's ship 3 days later. The Nomad delegation arrived in a massive fleet of interconnected vessels that moved through space like a living organism. Their society was unlike anything else in the galaxy. Individuals who lived their entire lives in motion, who knew no permanent home except the endless journey between stars. Fleet Speaker Corvain represented the Nomads in the negotiations. He was a tall, lean being whose people had evolved in zero gravity, with elongated limbs and oversized lungs adapted for life in artificial environments. His people's culture was based on movement and acquisition. They took what they needed from each world and moved on, leaving others to deal with the consequences. Human Admiral, Corvain said through his translator, his voice carrying the rhythmic quality of someone accustomed to speaking over engine noise. We are curious about your proposal. The aquatic worlds contain resources we require. Why should we negotiate when we can simply take what we need? Zhang had studied nomad psychology extensively during the journey. They were pragmatists above all else, driven by efficiency rather than ideology. They would negotiate only if the alternative was more costly than agreement. Fleet Speaker, Earth's intelligence suggests that your current campaign against the aquatics is consuming resources faster than you can acquire them. Your fleets are having to maintain siege positions for months at a time, preventing them from exploring new resource opportunities. Zhang activated a holographic display showing the economic analysis Earth computers had prepared. Additionally, the aquatics are destroying their own infrastructure rather than letting it fall into your hands. At current rates, by the time you achieve total victory, the water world you're fighting for will be too damaged to serve your needs. Corvain's expression didn't change, but Zhang could see him processing the information. The nomad leader had been in charge of his people's expansion for decades. He understood resource calculations better than most economists. What alternative do you propose, Human Admiral? A partition agreement. The aquatics retain their core breeding worlds and maintain sustainable population levels. Your fleets gain exclusive access to the outer water worlds and mining rights throughout aquatic territory. Both species get what they need most. And humanity gains what from this arrangement? Zhang smiled. Humanity gains a peaceful outcome that serves our interests. Continued warfare in this sector interferes with our trade routes and expansion plans. It was the truth, though not the complete truth. Humanity also gained everything the aquatics had agreed to pay for mediation services, plus the strategic advantage of being seen as the power that could impose its will on conflicts across the galaxy. The negotiations took 18 hours. Zhang's team worked with both sides to craft an agreement that gave each species enough of what they wanted to make peace more attractive than war. It was delicate work, requiring an understanding of both cultures that only humans possessed after decades of diplomatic contact. When the agreement was finally signed, both the aquatics and the nomads seemed surprised at how reasonable the terms were. They had expected to make more sacrifices, to give up more of their core interests. Instead, they found themselves with a deal that served their needs better than continued warfare. How did you do that? Chancellor Reeftal asked Zhang privately after the signing ceremony. Our own negotiators spent months trying to find a solution and achieved nothing. Zhang considered his answer carefully. Chancellor, the difference isn't in our negotiating skills. The difference is that we approach this as neutral mediators rather than interested parties. We crafted terms that served both of your people's actual needs rather than your stated demands. Could we not have reached such an agreement on our own? Possibly, Zhang admitted. But Both your species spent so much time focusing on what you couldn't accept that you never explored what you actually needed. Sometimes an outside perspective is necessary to see solutions that are invisible from within the conflict. The Chancellor's patterns shifted to contemplation. Is this why the galaxy has become so unstable since humanity's withdrawal? Because we have lost that outside perspective. Zhang didn't answer directly, but his silence was response enough. The return journey to Earth gave Zhang time to reflect on what humanity had accomplished. They had ended a war that could have consumed two civilizations, secured valuable resources and strategic positions for humanity, and demonstrated that they remained the galaxy's most capable mediators. But they had also fundamentally changed the nature of their role in galactic affairs. Where once they had been peacemakers driven by idealism, they were now service providers operating from calculated self-interest. The galaxy was learning to pay for the stability that humans had once provided freely. The question was whether this new arrangement would prove more sustainable than the old one. Zhang suspected it would. Respect based on fear and necessity was often more reliable than respect based on gratitude and goodwill. A week after his return to Earth, Zhang was summoned to a briefing with the entire senior command staff. President Chun presided over the meeting, her expression serious as she reviewed reports from across the galaxy. The aquatic situation was resolved successfully, she began, but it represents only one crisis among dozens. Our intelligence services report that major conflicts are brewing in at least 6 other sectors. The Galactic Council has been paralyzed for months by procedural disputes, and the economic damage from trade disruption is beginning to affect human colonies as well. She activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization. Large sections were colored red, indicating active warfare. Yellow areas showed economic disruption or political instability. Only a few regions remained green, indicating normal operations. The question we face is fundamental, President Chun continued. Do we continue our selective intervention policy, helping only those who meet our terms? Do we attempt to restore our former role as universal mediators? Or do we step back entirely and let the galaxy sort itself out? Fleet Admiral Jackson spoke first. Madam President, selective intervention is working. We're gaining resources, territory, and strategic advantages while our competitors weaken themselves through warfare. From a purely strategic standpoint, the current approach serves humanity's interests perfectly. Dr. Morris disagreed. Admiral, that's a dangerously short-sighted view. The galaxy is an interconnected system. If enough of it collapses, the resulting chaos will eventually reach us as well. Refugees, economic disruption, military threats. We can't remain isolated forever. General Patricia Hayes, head of intelligence, offered a different perspective. The real question is what kind of power we want to be. For 30 years, we were the galaxy's servants, always available, always willing to help, never asking for anything in return. Now we have the opportunity to be its masters, setting terms, choosing our interventions, building an empire based on our unique capabilities. President Chun listened to the debate for several hours before making her decision. We continue the current policy, she announced, but with modifications. We will not intervene in every conflict, but we will prevent any single power from becoming dominant enough to threaten human interests. We will provide mediation services to those who can afford them, but we will also ensure that no species becomes so dependent on us that our withdrawal would cause collapse. She looked around the room at her advisors. Humanity's goal is not to rule the galaxy, but to ensure that no one else does either. We will be the balancing force that keeps all powers in check, the mediators who prevent any conflict from growing large enough to destabilize the entire system. It was a complex strategy that would require careful management and constant attention. But as Zhang left the briefing, he reflected that it was also a strategy that played to humanity's greatest strength, their ability to see the big picture while managing the details. The galaxy was learning that humans could be generous friends or expensive allies. The choice of which relationship to pursue was entirely up to them. The Zephyrian Imperial Palace on Ether Prime had never seen such desperate activity. Emperor Sylphaner the Magnificent paced through the crystal corridors as his advisors scrambled to present him with increasingly dire reports. For 6 months, Operation Hegemony had proceeded exactly as planned, with Zephyrian forces systematically conquering their neighbors while those neighbors were distracted by other conflicts. Now everything was falling apart. "Your Imperial Majesty," gasped Defense Minister Krelvac as he entered the throne room, his usually pristine robes disheveled from his rush through the palace corridors. "The situation at the Tritium front has deteriorated beyond our worst projections." Emperor Sylphaner, whose species measured status by the elaborate crystalline growths that adorned their bodies, turned his attention to the minister. The Emperor's crystals were among the most magnificent in Zephyrian history, but today they seemed dim with worry. "Explain," he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonics that marked him as nobility among his people. Krelvac activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of Zephyrian forces across 3 sectors. What had once been a coordinated advance now resembled a scattered collection of isolated units. "The Garden World Defense Alliance has requested human mediation in our territorial dispute. Our intelligence indicates that Earth has agreed to provide services in exchange for exclusive access to the Elysium agricultural zones." The Emperor's crystals flashed with anger. The Elysium zones produce the most valuable biological compounds in the galaxy, resources that the Zephyrians had planned to claim as part of their expanding empire. "More concerning," Krelvac continued, "is that the humans are also mediating between the Silicon sovereignty and the hegemony of Kythera. Both conflicts were proceeding in our favor until human diplomatic intervention changed the strategic balance." On the display, the areas that had been marked for Zephyrian conquest were now either neutral zones under human oversight or actively defended by newly formed alliances that had emerged from human-mediated peace agreements. "How is this possible?" the Emperor demanded. "Human forces have not been engaged in combat. Their fleets remain in their own territory." "That's precisely the problem, Majesty," replied Foreign Minister Velterra, whose own crystals bore the blue tint that marked her as a specialist in interspecies relations. "They don't need to fight us militarily. Every time we move to secure a new system, they offer mediation services to our targets. Every time we break an existing agreement, they provide alternative arrangements to the affected parties." The Emperor studied the strategic map with growing frustration. The Zephyrian military was the most powerful in the galaxy. Their crystal-based technology gave them advantages in both offensive and defensive capabilities that no other species could match. But military superiority was useless when the enemy refused to engage in direct combat. For example, Velterra continued, "When we claimed the Mordian system based on ancient territorial rights, the Mordians requested human arbitration. The humans ruled that while our historical claims have merit, the current inhabitants have established legitimate settlement rights. They proposed a joint administration agreement that gives us mining access while preserving Mordian sovereignty. That's more than we would have gained through conquest," observed Admiral Tormek, the commander of the Imperial fleet. "Yes," Velterra agreed, "but it's not total control. And, more importantly, it establishes a precedent that human mediation can override Zephyrian imperial claims. Every species in our expansion path now knows they have an alternative to submission." The Emperor was beginning to understand the magnitude of the problem. For centuries, Zephyrian expansion had followed a simple pattern: identify weak neighbors, overwhelm them with superior force, integrate their territories into the empire. The system had worked because smaller species had no choice but to submit or face destruction. Now humanity had given them a third option. Species facing Zephyrian expansion could request mediation, knowing that human diplomats would craft agreements that preserve their essential interests while giving the Zephyrians enough to make negotiation more attractive than conquest. "What are our options?" the Emperor asked. Admiral Tormek stepped forward. "We could engage human forces directly. Our fleet's superiority would allow us to." "No," the Emperor cut him off. "Direct warfare with humanity would trigger mutual defense agreements with dozens of species. We would face a coalition war that could destroy the Empire." Defense Minister Krelvac offered another alternative. "We could refuse to recognize human mediation agreements and proceed with our original conquest plans, and be painted as the aggressors who reject peaceful solutions," Foreign Minister Velterra replied. "We would face the same coalition war, but with humanity and their allies claiming moral authority." The Emperor was quiet for several minutes, his crystals cycling through the complex color patterns that indicated deep thought among his people. Finally, he reached a decision that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. "Request a meeting with Earth's diplomatic corps," he ordered. "If humanity wishes to involve itself in our expansion, then perhaps we should explore what they want in return." The message from the Zephyrian Empire reached Earth 3 days later, and its implications were immediately understood by President Chun and her advisors. For the first time since humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, a major power was actively seeking negotiation rather than reluctantly accepting mediation. "This is a significant development," observed Secretary of State Rodriguez during the emergency cabinet meeting convened to discuss the Zephyrian request. "They're essentially admitting that our mediation strategy has been effective enough to disrupt their expansion plans." General Hayes agreed. "Our intelligence suggests that Operation Hegemony has been completely derailed. Instead of conquering 12 systems in 6 months, they've gained control of only 3, and those under circumstances that make future expansion much more difficult." President Chun studied the strategic implications on her display screen. The Zephyrian Empire had been the galaxy's sleeping giant, a massive military power that had remained largely contained within its traditional borders. Their sudden expansion had threatened to destabilize the entire galactic balance of power. "What do they want from us?" she asked. "Based on preliminary communications," Rodriguez replied, "they want to negotiate a sphere of influence agreement. They get guaranteed control over certain territories in exchange for accepting human mediation in other disputes." In other words, Chan said, they want to legitimize their expansion by getting our approval for it. That's essentially correct. They're offering to work within our mediation framework if we agree to terms that serve their imperial ambitions. Chen considered the offer carefully. The Zephyrian Empire was too powerful to simply contain through mediation. Eventually, they would either find ways around human diplomatic intervention or resort to direct military action. But they were also too dangerous to allow complete freedom of expansion. "What would we gain from such an arrangement?" she asked. General Hayes activated a new display showing human strategic interests throughout the galaxy. "A sphere of influence agreement would give us formal recognition as the galaxy's primary mediating power. It would also establish precedents for dealing with other expansionist civilizations." "More immediately," added Secretary Rodriguez, "the Zephyrians are offering us access to their crystal technology and exclusive trading rights to the rare minerals that power their civilization." President Chun had been briefed on Zephyrian crystal technology during her first days in office. It represented advances in energy storage and weapons systems that were centuries ahead of human capabilities. Access to such technology would give humanity significant advantages in both military and civilian applications. "There's also the strategic consideration," General Hayes continued. "If we can establish a working relationship with the Zephyrians, we prevent them from seeking alternative arrangements with other powers. A controlled expansion under human oversight is preferable to uncontrolled expansion in defiance of our mediation." The president made her decision. "Arrange the meeting, but make it clear that any agreement will be on our terms, not theirs. They approached us, which means they need us more than we need them." The negotiations took place on neutral ground, a space station in the Vega system that had been abandoned during one of the recent trade wars. Admiral Zhang commanded the human delegation, while Emperor Silfiner himself led the Zephyrian representatives. The meeting began with the elaborate ceremonial displays that Zephyrian culture demanded. The Emperor's crystals created complex light patterns that served as both greeting and display of status, while his advisors arranged themselves in the precise hierarchical formation that indicated the importance of the occasion. Zhang responded with appropriate human diplomatic protocols, but he kept the formalities brief. Everyone present understood that this was a negotiation between equals, not a diplomatic courtesy between allies. Emperor Silthaner, Zhang began, Earth appreciates your willingness to engage in direct dialogue. We understand that the Zephyrian Empire wishes to discuss territorial arrangements. The Emperor's translator rendered his response in the formal cadence of imperial speech. Admiral Zhang, the Empire seeks to establish clear boundaries for legitimate expansion while preventing unnecessary conflicts with species under human protection. It was a carefully worded statement that acknowledged human authority while avoiding any admission of Zephyrian weakness. Zhang appreciated the diplomacy, even as he prepared to test its limits. What specific arrangements does the Empire propose? He asked. Foreign Minister Velterra stepped forward to present the Zephyrian position. She activated a holographic star map that divided the local galactic region into distinct zones of influence. The Empire proposes the following framework, she began. Sectors designated as Zephyrian expansion zones would be subject to imperial claims without human intervention. In exchange, the Empire would respect human mediation in neutral zones and accept binding arbitration for disputed territories. Zhang studied the proposed boundaries with interest. The Zephyrians were offering to give up about 40% of their planned expansion in exchange for guaranteed access to the remaining 60%. It was not an unreasonable offer, but it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. What guarantee would humanity have that the Empire would respect these boundaries? Zhang asked. The Empire's word, the Emperor replied, his crystals flashing with what Zhang recognized as mild offense. Zephyrian agreements are binding for all time. Zhang nodded politely, but he had studied enough Zephyrian history to know that their interpretation of agreements could be quite flexible when circumstances changed. Emperor, Earth would require more concrete assurances. Perhaps we could discuss specific enforcement mechanisms. The negotiations continued for 3 days. Both sides probed for weaknesses, tested boundaries, and explored alternatives. Zhang's team brought decades of experience in interspecies diplomacy to bear on the problem, while the Zephyrians demonstrated the ruthless pragmatism that had built their empire. Gradually, a framework emerged that served both people's core interests. The Zephyrian Empire would gain recognition of its claims to 12 systems that were currently disputed by smaller species. In exchange, they would accept human mediation for all other territorial disputes and provide Earth with access to their crystal technology and rare mineral resources. More significantly, the agreement established humanity as the galaxy's official arbiters of territorial disputes. Any species could request human mediation, but the decision of human arbitrators would be binding on all parties. This changes everything, observed Dr. Morris during a private consultation with Zhang. We're essentially becoming the galaxy's supreme court for territorial issues, which means we gain veto power over any major expansion by any species, Zhang replied. No empire can grow beyond certain limits without our approval. And if they try anyway, then they face the combined opposition of everyone who benefits from the current system. We'll have created a coalition of interests that supports human mediation because it serves their needs. When the final agreement was signed, both Zhang and Emperor Silthaner understood that they had created something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time, a major power had voluntarily accepted limits on its expansion in exchange for legitimacy and stability. The implications rippled across the galaxy within hours of the announcement. Species that had been preparing for Zephyrian conquest now found themselves with guaranteed protection under human arbitration. Powers that had been considering their own expansion were forced to reconsider their plans in light of the new framework. Most significantly, the Galactic Council found itself facing irrelevance. While its members debated procedures and protocols, real decisions were being made through human mediation. The Council's authority had been based on the consent of its members, but that consent was rapidly being transferred to a power that actually delivered results. Chancellor Vorthak of the Galactic Council recognized the threat to his organization immediately. Within a week of the Zephyrian Agreement, he sent urgent messages to the leaders of every major power, calling for an emergency session to address humanity's unauthorized assumption of galactic authority. The response he received was not what he had expected. The aquatic republics, secure in their new agreement with humanity, declined to attend. The Garden World Alliance, benefiting from human protection against Zephyrian expansion, sent only junior representatives. The Silicon Sovereignty, engaged in human-mediated trade negotiations, requested postponement of any major decisions pending the completion of their current agreements. Even species that had not yet engaged directly with humanity began to hedge their bets. The Crystal Singers announced their intention to request human mediation for their border dispute with the hive minds. The Wandering Stars indicated their interest in human arbitration for resource allocation in the Outer Rim. "It's over," Chancellor Vorthak said to his deputy during their private meeting in his office on Nexus Prime. The once grand station now felt like a monument to irrelevance, its empty corridors echoing with the ghosts of past diplomatic triumphs. "The Council still has legal authority," Deputy Chancellor Zexaler replied, but his words carried no conviction. "Legal authority without practical power is worthless," Vorthak observed. "The humans have created a system that actually works. Agreements are honored, disputes are resolved, trade flows freely. What does the Council offer in comparison? Endless debate and compromise solutions that satisfy no one." He looked out at the space around Nexus Prime, where only a handful of ships remained. The station that had once been the center of galactic civilization now served mainly as a historical curiosity. "Should we approach the humans ourselves?" Zexaler asked. Perhaps they could be persuaded to work within the Council framework rather than replacing it entirely. Vorthak's laugh was bitter. "They tried that for 30 years. We ignored them, marginalized them, and took their contributions for granted. Now they've built a better system without us." The Chancellor activated his communication system and began composing a message that would formally dissolve the Galactic Council. It was an admission of failure that would mark the end of an era, but it was also a recognition of reality. "The galaxy has moved beyond us," he said to his deputy. "The age of collective governance is over. The age of human arbitration has begun." Back on Earth, President Chun received reports of the Council's dissolution with mixed feelings. She had not sought to destroy the galaxy's governing institutions, only to protect humanity's interests. But the Council's collapse was inevitable once species began choosing effective mediation over empty symbolism. "What are our responsibilities now?" she asked her advisors during their daily briefing. "Half the galaxy is looking to us for leadership, while the other half is either at war or preparing for it." General Hayes provided the military perspective. "Our capabilities are growing, but they're not unlimited. We can mediate disputes and enforce agreements in key regions, but we cannot police the entire galaxy." Secretary Rodriguez offered the diplomatic view. "We don't need to police everything. We only need to maintain the stability that serves our interests. Some conflicts may be beneficial if they prevent other powers from growing too strong." President Chin nodded thoughtfully. The strategy of selective intervention was working, but it required constant attention and careful balance. Too much involvement would overextend human resources, while too little would allow the emergence of threats to human interests. "Our goal remains the same," she decided. "We prevent any single power from dominating the galaxy while building our own strength and influence. We are arbitrators, not rulers, but we ensure that our arbitration serves humanity's long-term interests." As the meeting ended, President Chun reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since Elena Vasquez's announcement 3 years earlier. Humanity had gone from marginalized junior partners to the supreme arbiters of galactic civilization. The transformation had been driven not by conquest or coercion, but by the simple demonstration that human methods actually worked. The galaxy was learning that effective governance was worth paying for, and humanity was the only power capable of providing it. The question was no longer whether other species would accept human leadership, but whether humanity was prepared for the responsibilities that leadership entailed. The answer to that question would determine the shape of galactic civilization for centuries to come. 3 years after the dissolution of the Galactic Council, the galaxy had settled into a new equilibrium. Human-mediated peace agreements governed relations between most major powers, trade flowed along routes protected by human arbitration, and conflicts were resolved through negotiations rather than warfare. But beneath the surface stability, tensions were building that would test humanity's new role in ways none of them had anticipated. Dr. Sarah Chamartinez, the president's daughter and now Earth's chief xenosociologist, stood before the assembled representatives of humanity's diplomatic corps in the briefing hall of New Geneva. At 35, she had inherited her mother's analytical mind and her Aunt Elena's understanding of galactic politics, making her the perfect choice to lead humanity's most ambitious project yet, the Galactic Stability Initiative. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had grown up watching the transformation of human civilization, "we are facing a crisis that threatens everything we've built over the past 5 years." The holographic display behind her showed a map of the galaxy divided into different colored zones. Most of the core systems were green, indicating stable human-mediated agreements. But an alarming amount of territory was now colored orange and red, showing areas of instability and active conflict. The success of our selective intervention policy has created an unexpected problem, Dr. Chamartinez continued. While we've prevented major wars between established powers, we've also created a pressure cooker effect in the Outer Rim. Species that can't afford our mediation services are being driven to increasingly desperate measures. Commander Torres, recently promoted to head of the Diplomatic Protection Service, raised his hand. "Are we talking about the Refugee Crisis Director?" "That's part of it," she replied, changing the display to show migration patterns across the galaxy. Massive arrows indicated population movements from the Outer Rim toward the stable core systems. Over the past 2 years, nearly 50 million beings have fled their homeworlds due to conflicts we chose not to mediate. These refugees are putting strain on the civilizations that have accepted them, threatening the very stability we've worked to create. The scale of the problem was staggering. The galaxy's outer rim had always been home to smaller, less developed species that survived on the margins of galactic civilization. When the major powers had human mediation available to resolve their disputes peacefully, these smaller species found themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable. More concerning, Dr. Chamartinez continued, is the emergence of what our intelligence services call the Coalition of the Excluded. Over 40 species have formed an alliance specifically opposed to human mediation and the peace agreements we've negotiated. Admiral Zhang, now in his 60s but still serving as humanity's senior diplomatic advisor, leaned forward in his chair. What's their stated goal? They claim we've created a two-tier system that favors wealthy, established civilizations while marginalizing smaller powers. Their leadership argues that human mediation isn't neutral arbitration, but a tool for maintaining the status quo that benefits our allies. Dr. Chamartinez activated a recording of the coalition's most recent public declaration. The speaker was Commander Vexare of the Void Reapers, a species humanity had never directly negotiated with. The humans speak of peace and stability, the reptilian being declared to a gathering of hundreds of species representatives. But their peace exists only for those who can afford their prices. Their stability benefits only those who are already powerful. We, The excluded face extinction not through war, but through irrelevance. The recording showed the enthusiastic response of the gathered species, beings who had been pushed to the margins of galactic civilization by the new order humanity had created. They have legitimate grievances, observed Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as a senior advisor despite her advanced age. We created a system that works wonderfully for major powers, but offers nothing to species that lack the resources to pay for our services. President Chun, now in her second term, nodded grimly. And if we try to extend free mediation to every species in the galaxy, we'll overextend ourselves and risk losing control of the agreements we've already negotiated. General Hayes presented the military intelligence perspective. The coalition has been building its forces for 18 months. They've developed new weapons technologies specifically designed to counter our advantages, and they've begun coordinating their military strategies. The display showed intelligence estimates of coalition capabilities. While individually weak, the 40-plus species in the alliance had combined their resources to create a significant military force. More concerning was their tactical approach. They had studied human mediation methods and developed strategies specifically designed to make peaceful resolution impossible. Their plan appears to be forcing us into direct military confrontation, General Hayes continued. They've identified key systems where attacks would require us to choose between military intervention or allowing our mediated agreements to collapse. Dr. Chamartinez highlighted several star systems on the map. They've already begun probing actions against our allies. The attack on the Garden World Agricultural Station last month was a test. They wanted to see if we would respond with force to protect agreements we had negotiated. And we didn't, President Chin observed. We opened negotiations instead, which they interpreted as weakness, or as consistency with our principles, countered Admiral Zhang. If we resort to military force every time someone challenges our agreements, we become just another imperial power, imposing our will through strength. The debate that followed reflected the fundamental tension at the heart of humanity's galactic role. They had built their authority on the principle that disputes could be resolved through negotiation rather than force. But what happened when faced with opponents who rejected negotiation entirely? There's another complication, Dr. Chamartinez announced, activating a new display. The Zephyrian Empire has been making overtures to coalition members. Our intelligence suggests they're offering military support in exchange for territorial concessions. The implications were immediately clear to everyone in the room. If the Zephyrians joined the coalition, the balance of power would shift dramatically. The Empire's advanced military technology, combined with the coalition's numbers, could create a force capable of challenging human authority directly. Why would the Zephyrians risk their agreements with us? Asked Commander Torres. Admiral Zhang answered grimly. Because they've been analyzing our mediation patterns and realized we've been limiting their expansion more than they initially understood. Every agreement we've negotiated has included subtle restrictions on imperial growth. President Chen studied the strategic display with growing concern. The system humanity had created was under threat from multiple directions. Refugee flows that strained allied resources, a coalition of excluded species building military strength, and the potential defection of a major power whose ambitions conflicted with human-maintained stability. What are options? She asked. General Hayes presented the military solution. We could launch preemptive strikes against coalition staging areas, demonstrating that challenges to human authority will be met with overwhelming force. That would destroy everything we've built, Dr. Vasquez objected. If we become a military empire, we lose the moral authority that makes our mediation effective. Secretary Rodriguez offered an alternative. We could extend our mediation services to coalition members, offering them the same access to conflict resolution that major powers enjoy. At what cost? President Chen asked. We don't have the resources to mediate every dispute for 40 additional species while maintaining our existing commitments. Dr. Chamartinez had been studying the problem for months, and She believed she had found a solution that could address all their challenges simultaneously. "I propose we establish the Galactic Mediation Academy," she announced. "Instead of trying to mediate every conflict ourselves, we train representatives from allied species in human mediation techniques. We create a core of certified mediators who can handle smaller disputes under our oversight." The room fell silent as the implications of the proposal became clear. "You're suggesting we franchise our diplomatic methods?" Admiral Zhang asked. "I'm suggesting we scale them," Dr. Chamartinez replied. "We've proven that human mediation techniques work because they're based on understanding multiple perspectives and finding solutions that serve everyone's core interests. These techniques can be taught to others." She activated a detailed presentation showing how the Academy would function. "We select promising individuals from allied species and train them in human diplomatic methods. They return to their regions with the authority to mediate disputes under human oversight. For species that can't afford direct human mediation, we offer Academy-trained mediators at reduced costs." President Chun could see the potential benefits immediately. This would allow us to extend our influence without overextending our resources. More importantly, Dr. Chamartinez continued, it addresses the coalition's core complaint. Instead of a system that excludes smaller species, we create pathways for them to participate in the stability we've built. Commander Torres raised a practical concern. What happens if Academy-trained mediators make decisions that conflict with human interests? All major agreements would still require human approval, Dr. Chamartinez explained. Academy mediators would handle local disputes and minor conflicts. They would also serve as the first level of contact for species seeking to enter the human-mediated system. The proposal had merit, but it also carried risks. Training other species in human diplomatic methods would spread humanity's influence throughout the galaxy, but it would also reduce their monopoly on effective mediation. General Hayes identified the strategic advantage. This could actually strengthen our position. Instead of being seen as outsiders imposing solutions, we become the teachers who enabled other species to solve their own problems. Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. It also creates a new class of individuals across the galaxy whose careers depend on the continuation of human-style mediation. We build a constituency for our methods that extends far beyond human space. President Chun made her decision. Prepare a formal proposal for the Academy. But I want safeguards built in, oversight mechanisms, quality controls, and the ability to revoke certification if mediators deviate from established principles. What about the immediate threat from the coalition? Asked Admiral Zhang. We address that through diplomacy, the president replied. We invite coalition leaders to participate in the Academy program. We demonstrate that our system can evolve to meet their needs rather than simply excluding them. Dr. Chamartinez was already working on the implementation details. I recommend we start with a pilot program involving 6 coalition species, ones that have shown willingness to negotiate but haven't committed to military action. The meeting concluded with assignments for each department. The Diplomatic Corps would design the Academy curriculum, Intelligence would monitor coalition and Zephyrian activities, and the military would prepare contingency plans in case diplomacy failed. 2 months later, the first class of the Galactic Mediation Academy convened on Luna Station, humanity's newest diplomatic facility. 36 students representing 18 different species gathered to learn the methods that had brought stability to much of the galaxy. Dr. Chamartinez personally oversaw the opening ceremonies, addressing the assembled students with words that would be remembered as a turning point in galactic history. You are here because your peoples have chosen engagement over isolation, cooperation over conflict. You will learn not just techniques for resolving disputes, but principles for building lasting peace between different species and cultures. Among the students were representatives from 3 coalition species, the Void Reapers, the Crystal Singers, and the Wandering Stars. Their presence indicated that not all excluded species were committed to military opposition to human authority. The curriculum was intensive and comprehensive. Students learned game theory and psychology, studied case histories of successful negotiations, and practiced mediation techniques under the supervision of experienced human diplomats. But more than technical skills, they absorbed the fundamental philosophy that had made human diplomacy successful. The belief that most conflicts arose from misunderstanding rather than irreconcilable differences. Commander Vexare of the Void Reapers proved to be one of the most capable students, her natural analytical intelligence making her exceptional at identifying the underlying interests behind stated positions. During a practice session mediating a mock trade dispute, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of the process that impressed even her human instructors. "You see past the words to the needs beneath them," observed Professor Martinez during her evaluation. "That's the mark of a natural mediator." Vexare's success at the Academy created ripple effects throughout coalition leadership. If the Void Reaper's most respected military commander could find value in human diplomatic methods, perhaps the coalition's militant stance needed reconsideration. The shift in coalition attitudes accelerated when the first Academy-trained mediators began resolving actual conflicts. A border dispute between two coalition species that had simmered for decades was settled in 3 days by a mediator trained in human techniques. A resource allocation conflict that had threatened to split the alliance of wandering stars was resolved through structured negotiation that left all parties satisfied. Within 6 months, requests for Academy-trained mediation were overwhelming the program's capacity. Species that had initially rejected human authority were now seeking access to human-developed methods through their own trained representatives. The Zephyrian Empire watched these developments with growing concern. Emperor Silthaner convened his war council to assess the changing galactic landscape. "The humans have outmaneuvered us again," observed Foreign Minister Velterra. "Instead of being forced to choose between overextension and allowing chaos, they've created a system that extends their influence while reducing their direct involvement." Admiral Tormik disagreed. "This could be an opportunity. If the humans are training others in their methods, we could learn those methods ourselves and reduce our dependence on human mediation." "You missed the point," the Emperor replied, his crystals flashing with frustration. "The humans haven't just created a technique, they've created a culture. Every species that learns their methods becomes invested in their system. They're building loyalty through education rather than force." The Emperor understood that the Galactic Mediation Academy represented a fundamental shift in how power operated in the galaxy. Instead of control through superior strength or economic dominance, humanity was creating influence through the voluntary adoption of their methods by other species. "What are our options?" he asked his advisors. "We could demand our own training slots in the Academy," suggested Foreign Minister Velterra. "If we understand their methods better, we might find ways to work within them more effectively. Or we could accelerate our alliance with the coalition," Admiral Tormek countered. "Strike before their new system becomes fully established." The Emperor considered both options. The Academy represented a threat to Zephyrian independence, but military action against humanity would be extremely costly and might unite the entire galaxy against the Empire. "We will request Academy participation," he decided, "but we will also continue developing our contingency plans. If human methods prove incompatible with Imperial ambitions, we will need alternatives." The Zephyrian request for Academy participation created a diplomatic crisis for humanity. Including the Empire's representatives would legitimize the program in the eyes of major powers, but it would also give the Zephyrians intimate knowledge of human diplomatic techniques. President Chun discussed the issue with her senior advisors in the White House Situation Room. "If we exclude them, we prove that the Academy is just another tool for controlling who has access to effective mediation," argued Secretary Rodriguez. "If we include them, we risk training our most dangerous potential opponent in our own methods." Dr. Chamartinez offered a different perspective. "The Zephyrians are already studying our methods through observation of our negotiations. Academy training would give them formal knowledge, but it would also bind them to the ethical principles we teach." Admiral Zhang supported inclusion. Every species we train becomes invested in the success of mediated solutions. The Zephyrians could become our strongest supporters if they see how well the system serves their interests. General Hayes remained skeptical, or they could become more effective opponents if they understand exactly how our mediation works. The debate continued for hours, touching on questions of trust, strategic risk, and the long-term vision for galactic governance. Finally, President Chun made a decision that would define the next phase of human galactic leadership. "We include them," she announced, "but with conditions. Zephyrian Academy students will be closely monitored, and their training will emphasize the philosophical foundations of mediation, not just the techniques. If they're going to learn our methods, they'll also learn our values." The announcement that the Galactic Mediation Academy would accept students from all species, including coalition members and major powers, marked the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. For the first time since humans had achieved spaceflight, they had created an institution that other species actively sought to join rather than one they imposed through superior strength or economic pressure. The Academy's influence grew exponentially as its graduates returned to their homeworlds carrying not just mediation skills, but a new understanding of how different species could work together despite their differences. They became ambassadors for human diplomatic philosophy, spreading the belief that cooperation was more profitable than conflict, that understanding was more valuable than dominance. Within 2 years, Academy-trained mediators were operating in every major sector of the galaxy. They handled hundreds of disputes that would previously have escalated into military confrontations. They facilitated trade agreements that increased prosperity across multiple star systems. They created frameworks for cooperation between species that had never before found common ground. The coalition of the excluded gradually dissolved as its member species found pathways into the human-mediated system through Academy training. The military buildup that had once threatened galactic stability was redirected toward peaceful development projects overseen by Academy-trained coordinators. Even the Zephyrian Empire found itself changing as its Academy-trained diplomats began applying human mediation methods to internal imperial disputes. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the empire for centuries began evolving toward more collaborative governance structures that incorporated input from conquered species. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. As they trained thousands of students from dozens of species, humans learned as much as they taught. The Academy became a center for the development of new diplomatic techniques that incorporated insights from every galactic civilization. Dr. Martinez, now director of the Academy, reflected on these changes during the graduation ceremony for the program's 10th class. "We began this institution to extend human influence throughout the galaxy," she told the assembled graduates. "But we discovered that true influence flows both ways. You have taught us as much as we have taught you, and together we have created something greater than any single species could achieve alone." As she looked out at the diverse group of beings preparing to return to their homeworlds as certified mediators, DR, Martinez realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not conquered the galaxy or imposed their will upon it. Instead, they had transformed it by teaching others to solve problems the way humans did, through understanding, negotiation, and the patient search for solutions that served everyone's interests. The galaxy was becoming more human not through force or coercion, but through the voluntary adoption of human values by species that had learned those values could serve their needs better than the alternatives. It was, Dr. Martinez reflected, the most thoroughly successful form of cultural influence any species had ever achieved. 10 years had passed since humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the fractured, war-torn civilization that had once required constant human intervention to maintain basic stability. The transformation was so complete that many younger beings could barely imagine a time when conflicts were resolved through warfare rather than negotiation. Elena Vasquez, now 83, and serving as the Academy's Professor Emeritus of Historical Diplomacy, stood before the largest graduating class in the institution's history. Nearly 200 students representing 73 different species filled the auditorium on Luna Station, their diverse forms creating a living testament to the galaxy's evolution toward cooperation. When I was a young ambassador, Elena began, her voice still carrying the authority that had once shaped galactic policy. I believed that diplomacy was about preventing war.